I've just gotten back from the third session for my Edge of the Empire campaign, and I had a blast and was surprised and gratified that after the session people came up and shook my hand and thanked me for a great game and had a lot of nice things to say. So that was a good way to spend my my Sunday morning. This session was packed. As I mentioned in a blog post last week, I used the second session to learn about my players and what their instincts are and how they see their characters, and use that to generate feedback for each player about how to take what their instincts are telling them and apply the Star Wars genre to it. Now, after that second session, this is a group that knows each other fairly well, and having me there as kind of an outsider to their group, they had similar thoughts to what I wanted to lead them down. So as I took time in the intervening week to discuss this feedback with them, their minds were heading in that direction already, which was really nice. So I didn't have to have one of those talks like, for the good of the group, you need to change your character. We got to have talks where they were coming forward and saying, how is my interpretation of my character's motivation working or not working? So that was pretty cool. And they all talk to each other. They're in constant communication with each other throughout the week about the game, the events of the game. So as I talked to people, the ideas that I was communicating were spreading through the whole group, and people were ready for me when I got to them. So also very cool. So let's do a quick rundown of the three sessions mechanically. The first one, as I mentioned in my first video, I did not feel prepared. I felt like I would want to go into the rulebook to see what was and was not covered by the system, and if there were or were not difficulties already assigned to particular actions, and things like damage and how much strain characters would take. I just really didn't feel prepared. The first session went really quite smoothly, and because the characters talked their way out of every potential combat, we didn't end up having to try combat in the first session. So we did an awful lot of other things. There was slicing, there was deception, and there was charming, and there were intimidation checks, and there were several negotiation checks. There's a lot of social interaction. There was teamwork, there were passive checks, active checks, and the like. So we got to take the system out for a good walk that first time, but no combat, not a lot of strain, not a lot of danger per se, a lot of threat. In the second session, like I said, I wanted to sit back and see what people would do. I was far more prepared with my active knowledge of the rules, so I had very little cause to feel like I wanted to check in the rule book. In fact, the only thing I really needed to... are you okay? You okay? He's okay. The only thing I really needed to check... I'll be back in a minute. See? No trouble. The only thing I needed to check was the critical hit charts, as there was combat in the second round. Instruction or intrusion as a game master really only took place in making sure that everybody remembered how dice pools worked and pushing off onto them the necessity of building the pool. So they would ask me what the difficulty was, and they would take their own difficulty dice and that sort of thing. So by the end of that session, I wanted everyone to be really, really comfortable with the dice. So at the end of the first session, they were comfortable with the system and knew when to interject their own narrative description and when to look to me for mine. So this was a mechanical, practical step. which I wanted to take. And combat went fairly smoothly, and the non-combat characters got the message of how deadly combat can be, but that it doesn't have to be that way. This is still a swashbuckling, space opera kind of environment. So they can get involved in combat and do things as non-combat characters without holding the team back or putting the team at risk. So those were important things to get across. The third session today was the climax. There is a potential, depending on how things went, for this encounter to go longer, meaning it was possible that they might surrender or be captured or something like that, and so they wouldn't meet the completion requirements of the job that they had been hired for, because they would be in an Imperial brig aboard a Star Destroyer. So there is potential for the game to go longer. However, success was on their side. They escaped from the Star Destroyer and were able to get paid. They didn't get paid nearly as much as they had hoped, but thanks to all of the social networking that they had focused on in the first session, were still able to parlay some of the minor benefits that they had earned doing this job into some important upgrades for their ship. So they ended up feeling like they came out ahead, which left us, leaving the session on a high note. Also, people enjoyed getting experience points and dreaming of how they were going to express those in their characters. So I look forward to the next session to see what they settled on improving. So as for a recap, the first session was basically getting hired. And the obligation that was in play was for one of the droids. And it involves finding other droids in the same line. I'm going to refer to this droid as her. It's being played by a woman, and it just feels weird saying it all the time when I talk about the droid. So she is looking for other droids in the same manufacturing run. And this is a particularly rare line with some unusual equipment loadouts, and she's obsessed with finding these parts. So one of the main reasons why the group got into connecting with the black market to such a degree really was because of this trail of obligation. And so this very early on set the tone that having an active obligation was actually kind of cool, and it was they enjoyed seeing how I turned this little piece of data on the character sheet, this little tiny mechanic, into the background fabric of the setting for the campaign on the fly, and I certainly enjoyed it myself. And that really was the first session: getting hired, qualifying, passing the interview, and gearing up. Now, intermixed with these two main scenes, there were lots of threats from underworld enforcers and up-and-coming gangsters and rival bounty hunters and that sort of thing. The group is made up of a smuggler, an explorer, a hired gun, a bounty hunter, and this droid. So they're pretty intimidating. The second session, they depart. Now their mission is to retrieve data, and they're not really sure whether or not they believe that the stolen data plans that they're looking for are legitimately what they're being told, but they don't care. They just want to get paid. They have to escort an observer and 3 R2 droids to an abandoned rebel base and escape with the data. Fair enough. So they make the jump, and in so doing, they discover that their abused, hard-working ship is really nearing the end of its operational career. The nav computer is shorting out, and they're not sure that they'll be able to jump back out of the system. It needs to be repaired. They need parts. So they're hoping they can find enough salvage in the wreckage of the rebel base in order to repair the nav computer. as they come into the system, they pass the broken hulk of a destroyed rebel transport, and they trigger a message from an Imperial sensor buoy. So they feel like they're on a very short time limit before reinforcements show up. What they've been told about the system is that the Imperials found the rebel base and were called away during their assault. So the rebels escaped, but no ground forces made it onto the planet. So from the beginning, they were expecting ground forces to show up to finish the job. But they were allowed to claim whatever salvage they could find. Sounded pretty good to them. They were going to get paid. They had opportunities for bonus pay and whatever salvage they could carry. Of course, as soon as they were on the planet, they realized that this was sounded a lot easier than it really was. They couldn't find the computer equipment that the data was stored in, and very early on they began to realize there's a very good chance it was on that wrecked hulk that they passed on the way in. They got entangled with some of the huge and lethal local wildlife, and as they're finishing their rapid search just to confirm that what they're looking for is not in the rebel base, they see a Lambda-class shuttle with two TIE interceptors as an escort, making a landing approach. So they're getting ready to flee, and as the Lambda sets down at at one of 5 landing pads, that landing pad explodes, and they realize that they've been moving around this booby-trapped rebel base the whole time. And their Bothan, not intelligence operative, realizes that a countdown has begun, and they have to get off their landing pad before the rest of the rebel base detonates. So they make a hasty retreat. They have very little salvage to show for their names, just cold weather survival gear and rations and that kind of survival equipment. They load that. They finish loading that on, and there was one ship, damaged but operable, that they used as a decoy. They sent it off, programmed to jump into hyperspace, and they basically lit off in the opposite direction. And so that pulled the TIE fighters away for long enough for them to get off planet and dock with the hulk of the destroyed rebel transport. They send a boarding crew aboard to rescue the data, and this is, of course, even more challenging than they believe. One of the characters has to do a droid bounty hunter has to do this long jump through the void of space. The ship the spine has been broken, so it's kind of in 2 pieces. Has to jump from one broken section of the ship to another broken section of the ship, barely surviving, taking a critical injury in the process, and they're trying to revive and communicate with the ship's onboard computer to find out, where these data files may have been stored. And as they're doing that, the Star Destroyer, comes into scanning range and launches 2 TIE bombers, and there are 4 TIEs just doing normal perimeter patrols that do a normal sweep. First, they're pulled off to chase the decoy ship. Then, after it jumps into hyperspace, they're returning back to the Star Destroyer. They clearly receive orders to check out the remains of the transport. So the crew still left aboard their freighter is taking strain as the ships get closer. Are they going to have to duke it out with 4 TIE fighters and potentially 2 TIE interceptors and 2 TIE bombers with 1 light laser cannon turret aboard their freighter? And it's getting pretty tense, and things start to happen. Their slicer droid gets the ship active enough to start randomly firing off its point defense weapons. And while not a major threat and completely unlikely to hit the ties, it does change their focus a little bit on what they're supposed to be doing, and enables their gunner to damage one of the ties, which spins off, flaming off into space. The other ties break off. The bombers stop their bombing run until this threat has been cleared. Ties make another pass. Very, very lucky roll using destiny points. Ends up causing two ties to crash together, and the final tie peels off, and they follow it with a blaze of blaster fire, again damaging it. And yeah, so the guys on board the ship, the players are literally cheering and high-fiving each other, and then narrating their characters doing the same. And of course, all the Star Wars quotes are flying, like "Don't get cocky" and and so on. Meanwhile, the bounty hunter has to get off the ship, and the ties weren't just sailing around being targets; they were firing on the wreckage of the transport. So there's additional explosions, there's secondary problems, there's things falling and gravity finally shorting out and that sort of thing. And so he's got to escape with the stolen data files by using one of the last remaining escape pods, which is of course going to, on autopilot, shuttle him back down to the planet that they just escaped from. And so our heroes have to separate from the wreckage in their freighter and go pick him up, while the Star Destroyer is gaining on them and launching more fighters. And they know that the Navicomputer doesn't work, and the Bothan Knot intelligence agent is working frantically to try and program it. And there's trouble with the airlock. The separation did not go easily because of the secondary detonations on the transport. And all of these complications are not just being thrown at them by whim. These are the result of advantages and threats that are coming up on the dice as they perform their actions. So as the game master, I'm not just saying, okay, well, maybe this scene should be tenser, and so, to increase the tension, I'll have to throw in some kind of complication. No, they throw the dice to handle an action, and then I can just riff off of the result, and everyone can see the dice on the table, so it's not the game master being a prick or whatever. There's like 3 uncanceled threat symbols, so they know that something very, very challenging is going to come their way, or they're loaded up on advantage, and they can narrate the scene to their advantage. It was just the ebb and flow of contribution and coordination really made the session not only fast, but very exciting. And so they pick up the pod, they make a successful jump to like a getaway, a bolt hole system that they know, and deal with the data, make some repairs, enough to jump back to where to the space station where they're going to meet their employer, and they discharge this particular job and get paid. And man, the excitement level when we finished was great. I haven't had a session. It's been so long since I had a face-to-face session. I don't think I've had a session that was this much fun since the last session of my all-for-one Regime Diabolique campaign, a little over 2 years ago now. It was that kind of mood, the sword play, the witty banter, and of course the sword play, and this was, laser turrets and flaming TIE fighters and the like. But everybody, including me, is really looking forward to session number 4 and finding a new job. So that's the recap of what we did. The difference that, or the different thing that I did this time was I created an Excel sheet which I called my Star Wars crap tracker. And while you certainly don't need a spreadsheet to play the game, I wanted to include more passive checks in this. because they were on their own ship, like their home base, and they were doing things which are a part of their normal jobs. Escaping pursuit, choosing, escape vectors that are to their advantage and not to the patrol ship's advantage, and things like that. So I wanted to be able to, at a glance, verify that rolls weren't necessary, and compiling the pools and separating them takes a little bit of time, especially if you're passing dice around the table. And I have, like I mentioned, I have 3 sets of dice, and dice rolling doesn't take a long time. But if you don't have to roll at all, and you can turn that into praise and support for the character being one of these larger-than-life characters, then that's all good. So my crap tracker had everyone's obligations listed out, perception scores, stealth scores, the scores used to calculate initiative, cool and vigilance, and the scores used to deal with strain and intimidation effects and like discipline. And so that was definitely worth having. We did not use the dice app, but I think I may from now on. We had some fairly large die pools, and we had 1 or 2 situations where dice were going off the table in the coffee shop. And so I think from here on out, I won't be taking the dice. I'll be using the dice app, and 3 of the players have the app on their phone, so that's no big deal. And so, session number 3, ending the first story in the Star Wars Edge of the Empire campaign. So far, seeming like a massive success and lots of fun.